Hello and welcome to Inside Update, a show brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We are a nonprofit newsroom where we do journalism to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut. My name is Connor Dragotis. I'm the managing editor here, happily, and I am joined today by Brandon Whiting, investigative journalist, to chat about his newest investigation having to do with Section 8. And it's called Letter of the Law because it is kind of complicated. And if you don't know the letter of the law, whether you're a landlord or you're a tenant, there are some really big potholes that you could be driving straight into. I'll leave it at that for now. But I want to have Brandon A first and most importantly, how you doing today? Looks sunny where you are.
Yeah, it's pretty nice out. Yeah, doing fine.
It's nice to have that kind of like mid to late summer feeling now where we're, actually feeling like summer's in full swing, but not that like oppressive heat that was drowning us for a little bit.
Yeah.
um, Tell us about Letter of the Law. I guess the 30,000 foot view to start, and then we can chat about some of the specifics here as well.
Yeah, so it all started off we had received a tip from Richard Stefan, who essentially he had a big bone to pick because he ended up having to pay out quite a pretty chunk of change for a housing discrimination suit, and essentially he didn't quite understand why what he did was wrong. And as he sent us over a bunch of files he had FOIA'd for some CHRO complaints of landlords who had kind of fallen down a similar rabbit hole as him. The woman who filed against him, Titania Sellers, she had filed several suits over a span of time, basically for the same thing as Richard. And all you needed to win these suits was basically get a landlord to say, hey, we're not accepting Section 8. And because here in Connecticut, as well as I believe it's 22 or 23 other states, we have lawful source of income discrimination, where essentially if you are making your money legally, it is codified in state law that you cannot, as a landlord or a property provider, um, you can't tell someone, no, we're not going to take your legally earned money, because that is viewed as a form of discrimination. So
So
that's kind of the 30,000 foot view.
he's the landlord. Stefan is the landlord, and Sellers is the prospective tenant. And I guess
Yes.
just to really cut to the heart of what went wrong in the eyes of the law here, by the letter of the law here,
Yeah.
is he said the key phrase, "We do not accept Section 8," and
Yep.
that on its own is enough to trigger is it the legal action that needs to be taken or fines that are automatically levied? Like what happens when someone utters those magic words and someone who knows what to do with them hears it on the other end?
So essentially, you can file a housing discrimination complaint with CHRO, so the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. And what happens from there kind of depends on where the landlord wants to take it. And talking to Bob DeCosmo, who's the executive director of the Connecticut Property Owners Association, he's told me, I think he started being a landlord. I can't remember in exact years, but he has over 30 years in the business, so he's been around the block a little bit. He's he's talked to landlords who have had these issues. What you can do is you can settle up front, and that Bob was saying that that's kind of, whenever a landlord brings this up to him, he's like, just do it, because it won't be worth your time. It won't be worth your time or your money to do otherwise, because again, that's all it really takes is if you've denied someone saying, look, we don't take Section 8, no matter what your reasoning is, you say those magic words, you're done for. You have violated the state statutes, you've committed housing discrimination. So it's going to be cheaper and more cost effective, essentially, just to pay your settlement up front. Now, Richard Stefan here, I'm imagining he didn't have a conversation with Bob, or if he did, he didn't take his advice because
Yeah.
he said, no, we'll take this thing essentially to trial, which I believe CHRO calls it a public hearing. And he also, I believe, he failed to respond, so he kind of double it's kind of a double whammy there where he didn't really have the ability to defend himself because there's like a 15-day limit where you have to put in like your official response saying, yes, I want to take this to a public hearing. He failed to do so. And so the only hearing he got was a damages hearing where they were explaining to him, like, look, you kind of already forfeited your rights here. We're just trying to figure out how much you owe this person. And if it gets to that point, yeah, the fines can be pretty steep. I believe the final cost for Richard was 65,000 in total. So it's you're you're
A lot
playing a
of,
dangerous game if you
yeah.
if we go that road essentially.
And so he obviously felt strongly about this. I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing, and we can talk about reaching out to a journalism newsroom like us, and I think some people reach out and they want a story told a particular way, and that's not the business that we're in. We're in the business of actually getting to the details and taking a comprehensive look. But his claim was unique because he said, listen, it's not just this one instance. It's that this, potential tenant has done this time and time again, right? I mean, they said they've made at least $19,000 filing 9 different complaints with CHRO. And he tried to argue, this is a pattern, right? It's predatory on their part. They didn't actually even want to rent the place. They just wanted to live there. But that kind of misses the point. I think was what you ended up finding here is, yeah, maybe she filed 9, but that seems to be more indicative of landlords not knowing what the law is. And I think that bore out. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that bore out in your investigation as you talked to other experts in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of surprised. Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't say surprised, but when I was talking to Bob, I was expecting him, kind of to be a little more like Richard and be like, yeah, no, this is bogus, but this is something you have to deal with. But no, he was very much just like, I mean, yeah, that's the law. This is the industry you're in. I don't remember if I quoted it in the story, but he said something to me that I thought was pretty funny. It was like something along the lines of, he's like, everyone thinks being a landlord is easy. You just buy this property, you rent it out, people pay you money, and that's the end of the story. And he's like, people just don't realize, like, congratulations, like, you bought your property to rent it out, but you're now participating in like one of the most regulated industries in the nation. And it's not like whether you're pro or anti those regulations. I mean, I would say they exist for a pretty valid reason. And so whether or not you know the laws doesn't mean that just because you don't know them doesn't mean that you're not privy to them. And that's what Michelle, who works for CHRO as their legal division's director, that was essentially what she had said too. She was like, it's the first thing you learn in law school is, ignorance isn't a defense. So essentially it's kind of, I think the story serves as an interesting PSA to like both sides of the aisle. Like, hey, if you're out here looking for housing, you have a Section 8 voucher and you just can't get a placement anywhere, and there's a million people saying, no, we're not going to take it. Here's what you can do. And if you're a landlord and you're getting a bunch of Section 8 tenants coming up to you and you're like, I don't want to deal with this, that's what you can't do. So it's, yeah.
Well, we saw that, and I don't know that we've talked about this, but we saw this in our marketing of the piece as well, right? I mean, we part of my job and Joe's job as our digital director is to go out and take your investigations and make sure that they're in front of people across Connecticut, but also people who it's relevant to, not just a shotgun approach. We want to make sure that in this case, landlords see it, potential tenants see it, folks who are involved in reforming Section 8, which we can talk about as well. I think that would be a valuable use of our time. And we did get feedback in the form of comments of people, landlords either saying, "Oh man, this has happened to me. I really learned my lesson," or there were also a few people that said, "Oh my God, like I really need to get my head on straight about this because I didn't know." And it was kind of funny to see the back and forth of education happening in real time, which obviously that's what we want out of our journalism generally: inform and educate and get rid of corruption through that process. But to see people who, hey, they might have really stepped in it in the next couple months or next couple years, and I don't know, maybe we save them a few grand. That's that's got to count for something. We expect
Yeah.
donations for that, though, right? Percentage deal that comes back. So
That would be
um,
nice.
yeah, it would be. We're a nonprofit, for everyone watching, listening, and tuning in. I mean, I'll do a pitch at the end for sure about why you should support our journalism. But needless to say, it is all voluntary giving to our newsroom to help Brandon and I and our whole team do our jobs. Um, could you talk a little bit about the complicated nature of Section 8? That came up, and obviously, as I always say, you should go and read Brandon's investigation. There's so much detail in there, but you came across, I think, complaints from if there was one thing everyone was in agreement about, it was that this Section 8 is outdated, the word. Fill in the blank here for me a little bit.
So that was one of the things that was interesting to me speaking with Bob. He had said that when he started off as a landlord, he was like, he got the impression, essentially just the landlords that he had communicated with, people loved Section 8 because it's like, hey, I mean, these people are going to pay their rent on time because, I mean, they're getting their rent subsidized. So what's the big complaint? Since that, things have changed over the years, essentially, where he thinks that the processes for getting an apartment approved for Section 8, because they need to, there's like a housing standard that needs to be met in order for a property to get approved by the local housing authority, is typically who administers Section 8. He says that essentially it's gotten more and more stringent over time, and he thinks, he's like, I understand why, because you don't want to just be providing people, tenements essentially.
Right.
But he says it's gotten to the point now where the inspections process, not only is it too stringent, where he thinks, there's like even cosmetic defects the inspectors are going to crack down more hard on, and then you can get your property not approved, and if it's not approved, then you're missing out on rent, essentially, because you've been operating under the assumption that this tenant is going to move in. But also, he says that it used to be that the inspectors were kind of local to the area, and that that's not the case so much anymore. So he said you used to be able to kind of build a relationship with the inspectors. They would get to know who the good faith and the bad faith actors are in like a locality. So they kind of know who to trust, who to give leeway to, who to crack down on. And he's like, that's just not the thing anymore. You have inspectors who are a lot of times from out of town because they get contracted out, which makes them take longer. It can take longer to get a hold of an inspector. And then when you get the inspector, you don't know them, they don't know you. And also just kind of the overly litigious nature of our society. Oftentimes he's like, they're going to do everything by the book, which, again, I mean, like, yeah, you would think that they should, but when the book kind of expands over the years, you can also see why landlords are a little less, giddy
Right.
to be. They're not racing to get their apartments approved for Section 8, or at least
Right.
some of
Yeah.
them,
How thick
clearly.
is that book, right? If you're stacking them 10 high here, I mean,
Yeah, so
all come through.
there was that whole issue. And then as for the modernization factor, he was complaining that, when these laws were written, this was a pre-internet time. This was, there weren't emails, you didn't have cell phones. So basically all of the administrative things that you may or may not have to do, it's all by snail mail or fax. It's like, I've never owned a fax machine. I'm horrible with snail mail, so I can understand. I can understand his complaints with that. He's like, it can just slow down the process so much, and it'll make life worse not only for the landlords but for the tenants as well, because I believe the example he used was reporting damages. He's like, they have to mail it, you know what I mean? Proof of damages. It's like you can't just take a photo of it, email it over to the landlord, who will email over administrators, get a repair guy sent out. You know, all that could happen in the same day. Whereas because the law hasn't been updated to reflect our changing technology, it could take a few weeks, you know, if not more time. So that was kind of another thing that I thought was interesting. And it kind of like begs the question of, you know, I wonder how many other laws or bureaucracies are kind of hamstrung to that extent. I'd be interested to know.
It would be an ambitious project, but maybe if there was a way
Yeah.
we could chop it up into a few different pieces and take a look
Yeah.
at department or heck, even job description. I'm thinking about the people we're communicating with, government officials and business leaders on a daily basis, asking them questions about various news stories or investigations, and I'm imagining what our lives would be like if we were like, oh yeah, just fax that over to me if you don't
Yeah.
or internally, right? We're a digital only newsroom. I mean, we're live streaming this for God's sakes. Like, could you imagine if I was like, oh yeah, Brandon, just mail me your draft. I'll have it back to you in 2 weeks. Like, you can't. It's a huge problem, especially, and we have to put this in the context of, what Section 8 and the broader housing debate is all about. Is you want your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones, people in your community, people in your broader network to have housing that is suitable and worthwhile and allows them to live a meaningful life. And if you're bogging that down in anything, bureaucracy or bad actors or the litigious society, right? It's a problem. It's absolutely, and that's where corruption thrives. And I think that was the connection that when you pitched this story and we started talking about it, that really jumped out to me is there's a lot of dark corners, and that's not just the lighting and electrical problems in some of these apartments. It's like legitimate issues where we can't necessarily see what's happening. And I was so thankful to you in this process that not only were you, of course, talking to the representatives of these groups and dealing with the landlord who submitted the tip, but I mean, you talked to Tatiana Sellers, right? I mean, the person who was accused of filing frivolous lawsuits and going after these people. You were able to sit down with her and collect the information to get it. I mean, talk to me a little bit about that writing process, and in something as complicated as Section 8 and this housing debate generally. Like, talk to me about capturing the whole story versus, I don't know, agenda journalism or advocacy journalism, where it's like, no, 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 I want you to believe something at the end of this. How do you tackle it? To, in my opinion, I'll use this phrase, I have no problem with it. How are you being a good journalist in that atmosphere?
Setting me up to pat myself on the back. All right,
Yeah,
let's do
I'll do
this.
it. Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, it's frustrating sometimes because it's, well, whenever you're working on a story and you know it's going to, based on like the information you're given, like obviously Richard, he sends me these complaints, he's incensed, he thinks it's
Sure.
outrageous that this could happen to him and that he's the victim of the situation. Whenever you're dealing with a story where it's like one person is either making accusations or trying to frame it in one way, and there's another party on the other end, which, come to think about it, that's pretty much most stories. um, you want to be able, you want to at least make an effort to reach out to the other person, and in this instance, it was kind of, I was thinking, I'm like, this is going to be, there's, how do I make this not weird, right? Because I'm just reaching in on this woman like, hey, this guy who
Is about to write you a
yeah,
fairly
said a
thick
bunch of things
brief. Yeah.
about you, wants to countersue you, is really pissed off at
Yeah.
you. He basically shared his story with me, and I want to talk to you about it, just dropping in out of the blue. But I'm glad that she saw it as an opportunity kind of just to share her perspective as a tenant and kind of clear her name of being like, look, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this because I've been in this situation before, and it's frustrating. She had said that she, like, similar to Richard, how he had said he didn't know that this was a thing. and all the other landlord suits we shared. Well, perhaps not every single landlord suits, but there was a general feeling of people didn't realize they were sticking their foot in their mouths when they said, we're not accepting Section 8.
Yep.
Just as there was kind of that not knowing on the landlord side, I mean, there's the not knowing on the tenant side too. She had said that this had been happening to her far before she had started submitting suits, and she was reading up on housing law as in response to that. And that's when she had kind of reached out and found out about her lawyer, got connected with him, and from there, I mean, you don't want to, exactly, you don't want to be on the other end of saying, yeah, no, sorry, we're not accepting Section 8 to her, because she wasn't having it anymore. So it's like, I get where you're coming from.
Not much wiggle room. Not much wiggle room in those legal arguments. I mean, I'm not an attorney. I know, we don't have an attorney on staff. We have to outsource that. But that's it's very clear. There's just not much room to counter argue. Did you say it? Did you not? And oftentimes it's via text, via email. There's a written record there. I mean, this is such a vital takeaway, like we said before, on both sides of that argument. You got to know what's going on, because the ignorance is just not going to hold up in court. Sorry.
Yep.
Nope. Too bad. You're right. You're writing a check.
Yeah.
The human element there, I really appreciate. I think I'm not bashful in kind of bashing on ivory tower journalism and folks who kind of write and don't get into the communities and actually don't spend the time to have those conversations or seek out that deeper narrative. And you've done a really good job about that. I don't want to give away what your next investigation is, but I have to mention out there, and Brandon, on a Friday, we're doing one of our like reporter meetings, we're talking about upcoming stories, and Brandon's like, all right, I'm going to get a good night's sleep tonight because I'm waking up at 3 a.m. I'm going out to the streets of Connecticut City to, talk with people who are, struggling with addiction and drug abuse and stuff. And everyone on the call is like, okay, like we have that mentality of, if there's an opportunity to tell the story and get to that primary source, we're going to do it. We want to do it. We want to be there. And, credit to you for, putting in the legwork to actually get that done, again, for that future story, which I won't give away. But also here, I think that the same thing applies. You're one of those guys who's out on the streets talking to people, and you're just not afraid to ask the questions that need to be asked. How do people invite you to show up in their neck of the woods and get the scoop? Like, do you want the texts? Do you want the emails? Is it just send something to tips@insideinvestigator.org? What's the best way to get Brandon's reporting skills to pay attention to what people want you to write about?
Well, the tips@insideinvestigator.org is definitely, I mean, I always think that's like the thing that sets this paper apart from just any other that I've worked at. I'm like, damn, like, we get some good stuff, people send us some really good and interesting stuff. And even if there's not, we often say there's more stories than there are reporters, which is kind of just a tragedy of the industry overall, let alone our paper. But that's always I'll never tell people to not send stuff there. But if you have read my work and you're familiar with, you feel as though I am a good enough journalist and you want to deal with me in particular, then you could email me at brandon@insideinvestigator.org, and that's BRANDON. And yeah, I would say that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
I appreciate that. And yeah, it's true. And Mark and I were starting this project, we kind of talked a lot about bringing in different kinds of journalists intentionally. I think there's a risk in newsrooms to, all of a sudden you find yourself with an ideological monolith and all your reporters are basically writing about the same stuff. They have the same kind of voice. The journalism by humans for humans tagline didn't come along until, I don't know, maybe a year after we opened, maybe it was sooner, but that mentality I think was in there from day one of, no, let's get people who actually want to have fun with this, who want to care about what they're writing, who genuinely have a passion for the work. And I think that's reflective in what we publish too. I know we've had you had a couple stories, everything from train stations to handcuffing kids to, Trump's big beautiful bill. I mean, that was just last week. Like, there's no one niche that our team is falling into. So credit to you for that. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about, bring up in terms of this investigation or mention? Otherwise, I'm good to do our sign off and get folks back to their day and get this thing published.
I guess just first and foremost, if read up, know your rights, whether you are a landlord, whether you are a tenant. I think as far as housing goes, like we've talked about, there is a lot of gray area. There can be a lot of confusion, but this is one of those things where once you know it, there's not really much confusion at all. And if you don't know it, it could end poorly for you. So I don't know if we have. I feel like I'm taking Bob's job now. He's talked to me about. He's like, hey, I hold these classes. If you don't come, that's on you. Talk to Bob DeCosmo if you're a landlord. Other than that, yeah, I would say, I just appreciate anyone who takes the time to read our work, and I can't encourage enough people to do it some more. So.
Absolutely. Brandon, I really appreciate it. Great job with this one. Again, if you want to get Brandon's next investigation that put him on the streets to go and investigate, head over to insideinvestigator.org/subscribe, or we have ways that you can give us your email address on the homepage and in every article. Joe has built a whole system of ways that people can easily communicate with us and continue to get our emails moving forward. Again, that URL is insideinvestigator.org. And I'm also going to mention here as we wrap up that we're a nonprofit. I threw it out there earlier, but amid this national discussion of media funding, I think it's important to mention that we have a particular way of doing business that we've done since day one, and that is that we only accept voluntary donations, right? Like, we don't take government money. We don't take money that has been taken by force or fraud. We are entirely dedicated to surviving and thriving by providing value. We want our readers to, see what we do, believe in what we do. And if we hold up to scrutiny, which, hey, this is year number 3, I'm feeling optimistic. I'm really so thankful for the hundreds of people who donate to us and believe in our mission to root out corruption in Connecticut. We would love to have you join those ranks. It is at any amount that you want, $1 a month, heck, $5,000 a month. We would also love to have. You can head over to insideinvestigator.org/donate, or you can reach out to me directly. We deal with crypto donations, property donations, legacy gifts, DAFs, a bunch of different ways that you can support our work. And if you're not in a position to donate, no worries. We will always be ad-free, paywall-free. We are fully committed to this mission of doing journalism the right way. And we are so thankful for you reading, watching, listening, tuning in, and engaging with our work. Brandon, thank you again. I appreciate you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Inside Update. And until then, be well, stay safe,
Thank you.
stay informed.